Hiya, it's Amanda here from Lolli Lulu Crafts, and today we are going to be making a card using some of the things that I got in that Stampin' Up haul that I showed you probably just a couple of videos back. If you didn't manage to catch that video, I will put a link to it at the end of this one for you. So what you'll see is at the bottom of the screen as we go through the video, as I will put the name of the product that I've used at any given time. So we're starting off using this stamp set to stamp the sentiment, and I'm using this gorgeous watercolor paper. I decided to use the watercolor paper for the sentiment as well, so it all kind of matched together. And then I stamped the Pear stamp onto the watercolor paper using the VersaFine because that is a water resistant ink. However, what I did was I used this little sponge thing that I've got, and I dabbed the ink, as you can see, onto that and then tapped it onto the stamp, and that way I was able to get that slightly different. You can see some areas are a bit darker than others, and it gave it a little bit of a more sketchy look, which was the sort of design look of the stamp. I found that looked better personally than when I just stamped it flat with the VersaFine. So then, using these watercolor pencils from Stampin' Up, I coloured in my Pear. Now, when I use watercolor pencils, I use a paintbrush, obviously some water, but I actually take my paintbrush, I get it wet. How wet depends on how watery I want the colour to be at the time. And then, as you saw, I actually put the brush onto the nib of the pencil. I personally find that if you colour directly onto the paper with the pencil and then use your paintbrush to try and move the colour around, that you just seem to get sort of lines and stuff, and you can kind of see where the pencil was. That would probably be less of a problem here, since it is a sketchy kind of look to the stamp, so I think that's less of an issue, but I just personally prefer it that way. It's really is a personal preference on how you do it, but as I say, that's how I go ahead. And then as I go round, I'm just getting sort of a little bit more water on my brush, and so you'll see me going off screen with the brush, and all I'm doing is just putting a little bit of water onto the brush so that I can then spread out that colour. And what I'm trying to do is get it darker where the stamp is telling me that it needs to be darker. The person who designed it has made it very clear which parts are darker, so you can just follow that and use that as your guide as to where you want to put the most colour. Now, you can see from the part underneath the Pear where the stamp is showing like the shadow going off to the left, that is clearly where the darkest part is. So the left side of the Pear is going to be the darkest side. So although there is some sketchiness on the right hand side, where it obviously will still be darker because it's rounded, so it will be darker as it goes a little bit further back, it's not going to be as dark as on the left hand side. So that's why you'll see me doing it just that little bit darker. Now, what I've done here is I just took some water and I just moved the colour a little bit more away from the centre to lighten it even further in the centre. So now I've taken another green from that pencil set and I'm using that to do our leaf. And again, here I'm just putting the colour down where the darkest parts would be, sort of around the edges where the veins are. They're usually darker, and again you can see from the sketching where the artist is helping us to actually know where to put the darker colour. So this is actually, although it might at first glance look more complicated because it's all this sketching and stuff, and you might think, gosh, that's going to be quite difficult to sort of colour in and stuff. Even if you did it as a flat colour, it would come out really nicely because it's got the sketching in it that gives it the dimension. But actually what it's doing is helping you, if you're more new to that, sort of knowing where to put the dark and the light or the shade or whatever. It's helping you know where to do that. So what I decided was I really wanted a little bit of, I guess, colour shading as well, so that there was some depth of colour to it, not just as in dark and light, but you know, there will be different colours in the pear. So I took a little bit of the green that I used for the leaf and I put it down the sides where it's going to be, as I say, the darkest part. And then because it's still slightly damp, the water sort of takes a little while to dry off, it will merge in with the green, the limey green underneath it. And also I used the water to just really sort of blend that out, and just adding that in is just adding that little extra sort of color dimension then. So you don't need to do this part, but it does add a really nice effect, I think. And I'm just keeping on really layering this up, looking, you can see there, you can see the green of the sort of more the leaf green showing a bit there on that section. And I will go back in a bit and I'll just blend that out a little bit more. You can see I'm just blending that out with the water so that the edges are not stark and obvious. It's just going from sort of that darker colour to the sort of much lighter colour. You can see there I just added a little bit of water. And I know normally I don't kind of do this where I talk over this, we sort of maybe have music or something, but I thought it might be interesting, and hopefully you find it interesting, to explain why I was doing what I was doing. And just sort of, hopefully if you're more new, that sounds really bad English, if you're newer to colouring with shading, etc., that this will help you sort of come to get some ideas on how to do it. And I will add, I'm not a professional artist or anything like that, and clearly even you can see that I'm just doing what I think is right. So it doesn't mean that the way I'm doing it is, you know, the correct way. It's just how I do it, and I just think usually it turns out okay. I'm usually reasonably pleased with the look, so you know, I guess that's what counts. And I think it turns out effective, and I just really go by my gut instinct of, well, does it need a bit more? And look at it and yeah, okay, I need a little bit more that side, a bit more here, I need to lighten it in the middle, you know, just play around with it. Like I went back to the leaf because it wasn't quite dark enough, but I needed it to dry a little bit in order to get that layering to really work. If you want it to layer on top of each other, it will tend to not work as well if it's not drier. It will sort of just start blending into itself if you're not careful. Now you'll see there I used another colour there for the stalk, and I'm using that same colour for underneath the pear. And what I'm doing here is just kind of dotting that. It's quite an intense amount of colour on my brush at this point. You can see it's gone down quite heavy, quite thick in colour. It's actually quite watery still, but because I've dotted it, it kind of it's the colour has stayed in position, so it looks quite strong in colour. And then what I did was I basically just cleaned my brush in the water, and I'm using that to move that heavier colour and drag it out over where again the artist has put that base sort of shadow for us. And it's darker obviously under where the pear would be sitting, because that would obviously be tucked underneath the pear where the pear is rounded under, so you want that bit to be darker. So again, you just adding that slightly darker colour. I'm just adding a bit more there now, and I'm doing this part while that's still wet. So this part, having said if you're doing layering, let it dry, sometimes it does work to do it while it's still damp, because it will then kind of flow naturally and blend itself out. So it works quite nicely either way. It just depends on the look that you're trying to do. So in this case, I wanted it to flow into that sort of area that was coming out there, so I just added the extra colour while it was still wet. But I think it just looks really nice. It's almost like the pear is sitting on straw. But what I felt then was that where it was dark underneath there, with where the sort of sandy colour was, it needed a little bit more dark underneath on the actual pear. I felt it didn't have enough depth of colour and sort of making it really feel like it was sitting down into that and the pear was going sort of down underneath itself. It was rounding away. So I just added a little bit more of that leaf green colour, and again just blending it in with the lime. There was plenty of the limey colour there, so I didn't need to worry. So now with a lot of my drawings, stamps, I always like to, well, I say always, a lot of the time, I like to go round with a grey to make the item look like it's just not floating in midair. It's got some sort of, I can't know how to describe it. It's sort of sat on the background. It's got a background. It's got, again, I suppose it's just giving it that dimension. And what I'm doing here is I'm adding the grey, obviously darkest nearest the item itself, but what I'm doing is, you'll see I'm putting down just water first of all. The actual pear is completely dry. If you don't wait for that to completely dry, you'll actually end up dragging the colour out, and even if it's completely dry, if you're not careful, you can do so. But by putting the water down first, what happens is it creates this puddle, and the colour naturally flows into the puddle. So it just helps you control it a little bit better, because obviously if you're putting something down clear to start with, unless you sort of accidentally drag the colour out from the item itself, you've got a lot more control on it. It's really hard to see on here, the grey, but it really does make it look like it's sitting rather than floating. And I just find I do this a lot with my stamping. I just find it really just finishes it off. And what you want to do, and you'll see here, I'm taking literally just the water on the brush now, and where the grey is to the edges there, I'm literally just putting the water so it goes from something to literally nothing, just clear water, and that helps bring it out. And it's a very slow process, especially when you do it with the watercolors. It's much quicker if you're doing it with like markers and you're working, because you can blend them out a lot easier. But with this, you're having to go really slowly, because you don't want to oversaturate it and then make everything kind of start mushing into itself. So you're gradually adding, slowly upon slowly, adding darker and darker nearest the item. But then each time you also need to make sure that you pull it out, and that you make sure that that colour blends out and there isn't some sort of stark line. It doesn't look good if there's, like, you can see the line where it's sort of, here's the grey and there it stops. It looks much better if you just allow it to blend out from something to nothing. And you can see here I'm putting a lot more colour down, and the reason I was using a distress marker here, because there wasn't a grey in the pencil, so I just used a distress marker and I coloured it onto the watercolour page. You saw there I did earlier I did like a blob of the colour, and then I'm just literally using it like a paint palette and going onto it with a wet paintbrush, picking up the colour and then working with it. And then sometimes, obviously, as I say, I'm going back with just water on the brush to, as you can see here, again, just water on the brush, blending that right out. You can see how far out I'm taking that, so that it really does take that grey and make it, you can see there's no real distinct line. It's quite hard. I think you'll see it better on the photographs, so hopefully if you go across to the blog post, link will be below this video, you will see the photos on there, and you will see much clearer that grey shows up, and you can see how it makes it sit into the sort of card background. Now I'm just stamping this happy birthday. This is for the inside of the card. Again, I did it on the watercolor paper so that it matched. And now we're going to the actual, we're allowing that lot to dry, so we're going now to the making of the card itself, or the elements. And the first thing I wanted to do was, I felt like I haven't done anything with embossing for ages, and so I decided to do some embossing, and I'm using this gorgeous embossing folder, which will complement, it's not designed to, but it complements a die that I'm going to be using as well later on, so you'll see that in due course. But this is obviously a very big embossing folder, so I've had to use my platinum for that, and you'll see it comes out absolutely gorgeous. You can see that the actual embossing is really sharp, really clear, and a really, really pretty pattern, lovely and deep as well. The platinum is good for that. And then I die cut this. This was what I was saying, and it really matched. And then I just snipped off the edges. I won't be using those edges, but and then again, I die cut the sentiments, so, and the inner sentiment as well for the inside of the card. So I'm just, I didn't show you every single part of, you know, everything I die cut. I just showed you the items finished because, you know what it's like to see something die cut once you've done it. And this here is a card that I made. It's using my easy peasy card method. If you don't know what that is, again, I will put a link to that at the end of this video so you can watch how I made that. So then I just stuck that on the inside, just as you saw, using tape pen. I used a bit of the green cardstock that was left, and then I used this gorgeous stamp pad that we got in the last collection from Stampin' Up, and this piece of card or paper, I should say, is 6x6, and I turned it around. Actually, it was actually meant to go the other way, but I just found I wanted more of the green, and I just think it worked better that way. So then I cut that to be the same width. I didn't know at this point how deep I wanted the actual cardstock to be, so I just left that as it was. Then I took my embossed piece, and as you can see, it was actually not very much that I needed, but it was just so happened that the actual embossing worked so well with this particular design of the die cut that I just had to use it. So I ended up with quite a bit of embossed cardstock left over, but I think it was worth it because I just think the two look like they were meant to go together, the sort of lovely arches and stuff, and I just think it worked really well. And then this was just I don't even know what ribbon it was just in my stash, and it seemed to be the right colour. In fact, weirdly, I have tons of greens, but it was the only one that actually worked. So then I just, with the ribbons, what I do is I put a bit of tape pen on each end, and then I just wrap it around, and then it will then just stick down, because you can just pop it down, and you don't even have to turn it over, so you can make sure that it's all straight when you stick it down. And then you can see here what I was going to do is just stick it there, but then I thought it just needed breaking up a little bit, that ribbon, so I decided to add some lovely baker's twine, and I don't think you can see massively clearly here, but this is actually the green and white baker's twine, so it just goes again really, really well with the colours that we've got here. It goes nice with the pear and the greens that we've got of the cardstock, and I think it just works really, really well. And I decided to wrap it around twice and then cross it over to give that look that sort of just, I like that look where it sort of crosses. And then again, I've just put, on this case, I've put a bit of the tape pen on the back of the cardstock, and then I can just stick those little ends down, and it's good enough for the purposes of just holding it in place until I stick the whole thing down. So then I used wet glue for the back of the cardstock, except for this bit here. It would have been a nightmare to try and do this with wet glue. Now clearly the tape pen is going to leave like bits kind of through the gaps, but you can easily remove those afterwards, so don't worry too much. I think I show you how I did that, but I can't be sure. But I just line that up so that all the white around all four sides is nice and even. You want the wet glue on the embossing part. Oh yes, I do show you this bit. I just got like one of these erasers that are for glue, and it just basically, you tap it and it takes away the glue. But as I was saying, I wanted the wet glue for where the embossing is, because it's got different levels, so you need the wet glue in order to really to allow it to stick. So then with our lovely pear here, I use some 3D foam, because again, I just felt that it just gives a little bit of dimension, raises it up, and it just again adds a little something. Now you can see here how it's stuck to the twine and was moving it around, so I just lifted it up so that I could get it in the right position and make sure it was straight. Happy with that. And then I want to, before I press it down, I make sure that all the pieces are in the right place, because if I stuck that down and then there wasn't quite enough space for the sentiment underneath, then that would have been really annoying, and it could potentially, particularly with the die cut element, it could rip it. So it's much better not to push it down until you're absolutely sure everything is where it needs to be. And obviously make sure that your watercolor stuff is completely dry. So the next thing that we've got is some embellishments, etc., that I wanted to add to the front of the card. So the first thing I did was cut these lovely sort of leaves out using some nice dies by Tim Holtz, and I think that it just is going to look really nice. It's that lovely limey green again. They're sort of curving around, so they're going to go around the edge of our card really nicely. So what I've done here is I'm just fiddling around with positioning them, and I've got some little baby white roses as well. I don't know if this is true, but I had it in my head that pears or pear trees had like little white blossoms before they became, you know, got their fruits on them. But I could have made that up in my head. But in any event, whatever, it didn't really matter. It goes with the card, you know, the white looks right. And then I had these lovely sort of crystals that were on a kind of clear stalk, as it were. And they came as a set of 3. They're kind of wrapped at the bottom with 3 of these clear kind of twiny bits coming off them with crystals on them. And I put one down the bottom completely, and then the one at the top, it wasn't really working, so I fiddled around with it, but in the end I decided to actually pull the crystals off the actual clear thing and just use them as crystals, because it just didn't work. And I decided I still wanted the crystals up there, but the actual twine part was just getting in the way, and it just wasn't working. You can see here I'm still fiddling around with it, trying to make it work, and it just ended up that I was just like, this is just not going to work. So I took a bit of my glue. This is Pin Flare glue gel again, and that's what I was using under the leaves that are sticking down. And the nice thing about that is it doesn't stick straight away, so you've got a little bit of time. You can see you can do it flat, or you can do it with a little bit of raised, sort of where there's shape. So like the bottom of that rose has got a shape, so you can put enough glue on it that it will still stick down and it will stay stuck. It's really, really strong. And you can see here I'm just fiddling around with that crystal just to position it where I wanted it, and then I'm still sort of thinking, where do I want it? Does it need to go? Where's the right place? And that's the beauty of it, is that you keep sort of moving things about until you're happy with where they are. And then with this glue, you can see it's got a bit of a bump, so I was able to raise it up a little bit. The crystal's slightly shaped, but also was able to raise it up a little bit so it kind of was level with the leaf rather than right down on the base of the card, so it still gave it that dimension. Now with this bit, obviously I kind of have to remember how I had it, because I kind of have done it and now I've got to take it all apart and put it back together again. So with this one, what I did was I took the glue gel, so you can see I've got it on the end of my blade here, and I'm popping it underneath. So I'm just very carefully lifting up the edge of that sentiment, and I'm putting a couple of blobs of the glue underneath, so it acts like a lump of the glue. And then all I need to do is pop the stalk into that blob, and actually that would be enough to hold it if I wanted it to. It really would. It's very, very strong once it dries. However, I wanted these to stay where I wanted them. I didn't want them to slide left and right, and I was concerned that might happen. So you can see here what I'm doing is I'm not doing it as a thick. Unlike before you saw I did a blob, this I'm doing flat, so I'm just kind of scraping on in a more flat way. And you can see here a bit kind of came out the side, so all we do is, well, I'm just going to stick that one down, but then all you need to do is just take your blade where there's a bit extra and just tidy it up, and it'll be fine. And again, that's the beauty of it, and you can just see there's a little bit sticking out, and just going along with that blade and just tidying it up. It might take a few goes, but there we go. And it dries totally clear anyway, so it's not really too much of a big deal. And then you can see there, I've got this, you can see the white where it's those crystals are sort of 3 stalks are wrapped together. And with this one, I'm not sticking those crystals down at all, other than sticking it into that glue gel that's in underneath the sentiment. And then I'm just going to position the roses, and then I can put the glue under it once I'm happy that I've got them where I want them to be. In fact, I think I've already put the glue on it in this case. Sometimes you can't always tell. Yes, I've put the glue on it already. Sometimes I sort of position them and then I put the glue on it, because sometimes you think, oh gosh, I can't remember where I want them to be, and other times you're like, oh no, I know, I'm happy. In this case, it was a bit of both. I was sort of partly happy and partly not, so I fiddled around with it. As it happens, I think this particular rose needed a bit more glue on it anyway, so that was fine, because it was a bit... Because the roses have like a pointy bit underneath where you've had the wire and you've snipped it off the wire. Even if you snip it quite close, there's kind of almost like a pyramid look to it. So having that glue gel means that the point will sit onto the paper, but around it the glue will be there holding it in position and making sure, you know, that it's all correct. So that's those done and stuck down. And then the last thing I decided, sort of last minute really, and it literally was also the last piece of that ribbon, was to knot it so it looked like a bow, because I didn't even have enough to make a bow, and then just pop it down almost like that was a bouquet. And actually I quite liked it with the knot. I used to do that a lot and I hadn't done that for a long time. And again, just tidying up the glue gel there, and you literally won't notice it, and it just looks really, really nice. And then the last thing, or nearly the last thing I did, was add some crystals, because you've got to have a bit of shine. And I felt that the crystals in the corner would look really nice, and also onto the sentiment itself as well, slightly smaller ones on there. So there's one each of the larger ones in the corners of the card, and then one each of each end of the sentiment of the slightly smaller ones. And then I took my crystal stickles and I just very carefully, because the glue gel hadn't quite dried yet, just went over where the roses themselves, just to give a bit of shimmer to the roses. It's really hard to catch in the light, hopefully you can see it, but yeah, it looked really pretty. It just gave just a nice effect to them, and just sort of finished it off, just give a little bit of shimmer going on, so it sort of made them less flat. You want to be careful that you don't go so mad that you lose the dimension and the shape of the rose. You want to kind of push the glitter into the petals a bit, which is why really you should probably do it when the glue gel's dry. But, you know, I don't have the patience. I don't normally wait. I just sort of shove and hope for the best. I'm sure a lot of us are like that. But anyway, so that's that one there. You can see that a little bit better, I think, on that one. And there it is done. And there's the inside. And I think that turned out really, really pretty. I was really, really pleased with that. And I think you can see in this shot a little bit better the grey around the pear as well. So that is it for today. I hope you have enjoyed watching this video. I know it's a little bit longer because we showed all of the colouring and didn't speed it up, but I thought it might be of interest to see it in real time and have me kind of explain why I was doing what I was doing. So I hope that that was useful and enjoyable. And I will see you again next time. Oh, and don't forget to go on over to the blog post. There'll be lots of photos for you to see of the finished cards, so you'll get to see more close-ups, etc. And of course, if you wouldn't mind, if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have subscribed, or even if you haven't, if you've enjoyed the video, I'd be really grateful if you could give it the thumbs up. Thank you so much, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now. Bye.